Welcome to Business Problem Solvers Podcast, where legal insight meets entrepreneurial innovation. Are you a startup founder navigating the complex legal landscape of entrepreneurship? Are you seeking practical advice, actionable strategies, and expert guidance to propel your business forward? Look no further. Eric Alspaugh is a seasoned attorney based in the vibrant startup hub of California, and he's thrilled to be your host on this exciting journey. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the intersection of law and business, bringing you insightful interviews with a diverse range of industry experts, thought leaders, and successful entrepreneurs. From intellectual property and contract law to corporate governance and regulatory compliance, we'll cover the essential legal topics that every startup needs to know. Our guests will share their wisdom, experience, and practical tips to help you navigate legal challenges, seize opportunities, and build a thriving business in today's dynamic marketplace. So whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur, a budding startup founder, or simply curious about the intersection of law and business, join Eric on Business Problem Solvers Podcast as we explore the legal insights and entrepreneurial inspiration that will fuel your journey to success.
Hey, welcome, Travis, to the Business Problem Solvers Podcast. It's an honor to have you here. And I just want to introduce you to my audience, that you're a friend, a colleague, a coworker, and a podcaster and teacher that has a wealth of information and knowledge. And I hope that we could just tap into a few things and keep our topics conversational and interesting like they are in real life. So
boy, that's such a fancy introduction, Eric.
I know. I'm getting good at this. No, thanks for coming on. And we have a lot in common. We worked at Device Alliance and had lots of adventures over the past 10 years, ups and downs. And so that's one of the things I want to talk to you about. I probably want to start off with, the MedTech space and maybe some tips in the space for business development or anything in that vein that you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, the data on the MedTech industry, at least from a startup perspective, I've always found really interesting because there's lots of opportunity there, right? And the market continues to expand. I think that the CAGR over the next 4 or 5 years is upwards of 5%. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there. And as we all know, with the baby boomer generation continuing to age, that's just going to increase the need for healthcare. So, it's a good space to be in. But that being said, the statistics around a MedTech startup meeting success is really not that great when you actually look at it. And I've always found that information really fascinating because, and I know this number moves a little bit, but it's something like every 2 to 1.8 startups out of 10 end up meeting success. So whether success is, commercializing and kind of scaling up internally by themselves, building up their own sales force, or it's getting acquired, right? Really interesting industry, lots of growth, but it's challenging.
Right. So that math is about 18% to 20% of companies will have some sort of objective success, and the other 80 to 82% would be what we would call a failure.
Yeah, and look, and I love the way that you put that. My math and perhaps the way I'm looking at that is perhaps not the most scientific, but at the end of the day, when you look at, let's say, a PMA device, on average, it takes upwards of about $100 million to get that kind of a product to market. So when you're talking about a PMA device being the most challenging to develop, meet regulatory approvals, get to market, when you're talking about $100 million plus, and you have a give or take 20% chance of achieving that, I know that's one of the biggest things where investors have been looking at that, and why there has perhaps, I don't want to say a pullback, but you hear constantly, when you and I are at these events, people talk about how it's been really challenging to get new funding. And certainly part of that goes into, money's just really expensive right now and has been for the last couple of years. So inflation doesn't really help that, right?
Right. Yeah. I remember, and so taking inflation into account, 100 million isn't what it used to be. And back in 2002, Boston Scientific, it cost them $1 billion to obtain the approval, the regulatory approval for the first drug-eluting stent. And so Johnson & Johnson in 2003 got the second drug-eluting stent approved on the U.S. market, and their regulatory cost was only $750 million. And so the CEO at that time received a nice bonus for being second.
Yeah, I mean, look, I still contend and believe, and I will admit my bias here. I mean, this is the industry and profession that I've chosen. I think there's a great opportunity in the market. And one of the things that I look at, especially because the company and the business that I own provides medical consulting support, primarily in the engineering and quality compliance kind of regulatory landscape. One of the biggest things I look at when we go internal and we're talking with a customer is, where's their management team at? What's the background? How does the team kind of operate? Because that tends to be the indicator as to whether or not that company is going to see success. At least in our local market here, there are several groups where this management cohort, if you will, has continued to work together time and time again. And they might be on 3, 4, 5 startups that they've produced. And interestingly enough, as the old school phrase goes, the Midas touch. And I get that saying that dates me a little bit, but once you've figured out this rhythm, this operating rhythm for starting a business, identifying user needs and the therapy that needs to go with that, and then surrounding yourself with the right team. It's interesting how these people time and time again have figured out that secret sauce, whereas lots of other folks around them haven't gotten to that point yet.
That is fantastic advice. And just changing gears a little bit, I wanted to ask about doing business development, but just to follow up on what you said, can you tell me more about how to identify those type of people that have had a successful exit, and how can you get them to join your team, or how can a startup venture, I work with inventors, so how could an inventor approach and help create a team to help manage their product development, regulatory, and future development steps?
I think the first thing is, and look, a lot of people do this, right? You kind of start something in your garage, as we all like to kind of refer to it. In Southern California, that might be in an incubator, or fancy office, right? So it's not always the garage. But that said, I think a lot of it comes down to mindset.
All right.
When you're at a really early stage in forming a business, whether it's a medical device company or it's any other business, I would argue that one of the biggest things to focus on if you're going to have partners is they have to have the same mindset, that team. Because if they don't, what you're inevitably going to find is that people's motivations, their work ethic is not going to be in sync. And that will cause problems really quick in the relationship. And the reason I know that is both from my own experience, but my father actually happens to run and own a small business coaching, executive coaching firm. And he has told me from his own experience of being in that business for the better part of the last 15 to 20 years, The number one reason a startup or small business will fail is because the original founding members or those partners no longer see eye to eye with the way that the business is operating. One person feels like they're working triple time while the other person's taking all these vacations, right? Or whatever it may be. And the delusion of that relationship ends up dissolving the company. And so for that reason, based on my own, I hate to use this phrase, but my own lived experiences, that's one of the biggest issues that I see. So if I was going to start a business with a partner or multiple partners, that's the first thing I'm looking at is what's their mindset, what's their work ethic, and what are they bringing to the table that's different than what I'm bringing to the table.
How can you identify those characteristics?
Well, I think a lot of it is building relationships with people and getting to know what makes them work, what drives them, right? Because that answer is not going to be the same for everyone. Sure. Eric, even though you are an excellent attorney, the reason you do that type of work is not going to be consistent across the board as to why the next attorney's in that role or in that profession, right? So I think it's really important that we understand what people's motivators are and make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what the commitment is. Because that, I'm, I don't know, 8.5 years into owning and running my first business. So, this is very much still my first rodeo here. So what I can tell you, though, from that experience, as well as being involved in a CEO roundtable that I participate in, it's a ton of work starting a business.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to have partners, everybody's going to sign up for that same level of intensity and that same level of work. Everybody's got to understand and be on the same page with, hey, it's going to take X amount of years, it's going to take X amount of dollars, right?
Yeah.
That's another sticky point. If you're putting your own money into the venture, that kind of creates a different level of accountability, right?
Absolutely. So I was going to ask you about founder pitfalls. You see this being your first venture, I'd like to hear some anecdotal stories maybe, or real stories. And then you probably, being in a consulting role, see many more early stage companies, mid-stage companies, and watch how management interacts. Do you have some key pointers or tips for our audience?
Yeah, Eric, that's a great question. Do you ever remember a TV show? And I'll segue into your question here in a moment. It was on a while back. It was called How It's Made.
Yeah.
And it was this show. It was actually really interesting. I can't remember what channel it was on, but the show itself took you through all of the back-end processes for how general products that you and I would interact with in every day of our lives, how they're actually made on mass scale. So for example, one of the episodes I saw was how they make M&Ms, right? You're talking a product, millions and millions of units that they're putting out. But the reason I give you that example is because that's what I feel like my day-to-day job in life is. I get an opportunity to go under the hood with a lot of companies. I end up meeting probably with half a dozen or more companies every week. And so what that does is that gives me a really interesting purview into how different businesses are run, some of the things they do really well, and of course, to your question, some of the things that perhaps don't work so well. I think the first thing that I see that usually causes problems is the leadership team. So whether these people are owners or not, but the folks who are running the ship, who are leading the charge, right? They're not on the same page. They have different priorities, different perspectives. I see pretty often where one person clearly is trying to achieve something, and then literally their peer, who should ideally be helping them, has a different perspective on the matter and is almost kind of working against them.
Wow.
You'd be surprised how often stuff like that happens. So, I think that's one piece. Funding is another huge issue.
Of
A
course.
lot of startups, if they are funded, venture backed, private equity, whatever it may be, you kind of live and die on the vine based on what your next milestone is. So that can be problematic if usually it's the CEO or the CFO who's in charge of really managing funding, obtaining that next funding round. Well, if you have
Right.
people in those jobs who are relatively inexperienced with the process of going out and obtaining funding, courting the funding community, I think you can find that maybe they wait too long to get engaged in that activity. And then all of a sudden they find themselves, and the company for that matter, in a situation where, they have to start cutting folks or cutting down on the way that they're spending money because they weren't able to achieve that next tranche or that next series, whatever it may be, right?
Exactly. And my experience over the last 10, 15 years has been working with a lot of CEOs. And I found that the vast majority of CEOs, that's really their only job is going out and managing capital. That's really their function. They're good at it, and it's very hard to do. So yeah, people think that being the CEO is just I'm in charge and what I say goes, but they're at the bottom of the food chain. Everything falls on them. So I don't know.
Well, in that the way that you describe that, I would agree. I see that a fair amount, but I also look at the CEO as you are the lead salesperson for the company, right? So I would politely argue that it's more than just funding. You are the person that's up on stage presenting the technology, getting people to buy into your vision, right? And that's another challenge that I see for some startups is, and nothing against my brethren that come from the engineering space, but if you're going to be a key leader, a key stakeholder within a startup, especially the CEO, you better dang well learn how to sell. Because if you can't sell, that is a huge, huge missed opportunity for the business.
I think that you're identifying that's a gap that I see working with inventors who they think I've got an idea, I've filed a patent, I've even got a diagram, and if we can build it, they will come. And it's a long road in between idea to selling in the market. And I'm curious if there are any steps or tools that you can recommend for inventors to help bridge that gap to salesman or CEO. Are there any programs or any tools that you're aware of?
So there are. That being said, look, I mean, I will openly admit I tend to be a rather opinionated person. Hopefully, most of the time, those opinions come from experience. But that being
Absolutely.
said, I wouldn't say every situation this is appropriate, but one of the best things a technologist, an entrepreneur, a founder, however you want to kind of carve that up, what they can do is drop the ego and get out of the way. Right.
Okay.
So I'll never forget, and I know he didn't make this up, but it's just this is the first place I heard it. My father has said to me before, "Do you know what 100% of zero is?" Well, it's zero, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big challenge for lots of people in the startup space, and this is not just a medical device issue. This is just entrepreneurism, if that's even a word for that matter. But getting out of your way and identifying people perhaps who have a better skill in a certain department than you to take on that task. And I will openly admit all day long, that takes a really humble person, but a person who sees the bigger picture, right? And this discussion we're having right now, and kind of in this vein of startups and entrepreneurs. And if you are a technologist by trade, and that's truly where your passion is, there's nothing wrong with being CTO or of some flavor like that in your own company. But
Sure.
if ideally, you're just not excited about being kind of the main guy, the CEO, the president, the person out there, kissing babies and shaking hands, it's okay to step aside and have somebody else do that on your behalf. But that said, that still goes back to what I was sharing earlier, which is if you're going to do that, you better make sure you interview the heck out of people and you understand wholeheartedly really what it is you need and want out of that person, right?
Okay.
The other area I would say for someone who, maybe you've got a great idea, you just don't really have interest in taking it all the way through yourself. There are organizations out there that will help do that for you. So for example, just in Southern California alone, within the medical device space in particular, there are the better part of half a dozen really quality incubators in the local area. So for folks who are listening, if you're not familiar with what an incubator is, it's a business where their core focus is to take, we'll kind of refer to as like fledgling technology. So technology that's very early, might not even have been vetted out from a feasibility perspective. And they will, as a business, help move that technology from a development perspective forward. That could be a huge advantage for a founder technologist to build a relationship with a group like that. There's right here in Orange County, there's an organization called NIDUS. Great group of people. It's NIDUS, NIDUS. Go check them out, NIDUS Biomedical. But that's a great example of an organization who has a really great breadth of expertise when it comes to taking early technology and moving it into at least where it can be positioned for commercial success.
That's a great tip, Travis. Thank you. I'm going to have to look into them myself. So I know that you have a business that is successful and that you work in the community and you like to give back. And so I worked with you at Device Alliance, where you were the president for, I think, like 4 years and really helped grow that organization. Can you speak to the impact and the opportunities that professional groups like Device Alliance provide, and what kind of relationships they might have for providing introductions to incubators or capital through organizations like Octane?
So, we've mentioned Device Alliance a couple times. So for folks who are listening and are not familiar with Device Alliance, it got started around 2009, 2010 as a medical device professionals association. So the organization is a nonprofit, 501c3, and its whole focus is to really help connect the ecosystem of the medical device industry within Southern California, but its initial roots were specific to Orange County, and make sure that whether you are at an OEM, you're at a supplier, you have the right connections and the right path in order to be successful in your role. Look, I'm biased about this discussion here. I absolutely love organizations like that. And that was the reason that I got involved in the first place, maybe 2012 with Device Alliance, just because, thriving industries, they need organizations like that. People really need a place where, as cheesy as it is, it's kind of like that old show. And maybe I need to get, by the way, some newer stories to share here, because I keep throwing up old stuff. But that old show Cheers, like, you want to be able to go to a place where people know your name, as cheesy as that is, but it's really helpful from a career perspective. And I think Device Alliance did that really well. And I remember we would get lots of feedback from newcomers that would come to the events once a month, and just how supportive the group was. So I think for that reason, that's why I got involved. I would highly recommend to your listeners, Eric, that if you are, as a professional, if you're not involved in some sort of a trade group, association, professionals group of some kind, it's a missed opportunity, because the amount of relationships you'll build from attending events and groups of that nature will really impact your career in such a positive way. But then the other thing too is I can't even begin to tell you or even count the number of times that I found myself in a discussion at one of those events where I was getting insider information of some kind that I never would have received just kind of going about my daily practice, right?
Sure.
So, if you want to be informed and you want to develop your career and you want to help other people to where you can, it's great. It's great for that.
I appreciate that. And I know that people's time gets compressed, and they start attending events and then they drop off. Can you speak to consistency of attending events, and maybe as a practical tip, what kind of a budget should someone consider, or how much time percentage wise or hours per month should they consider devoting to a professional organization or professional development?
Yeah, it's funny, Eric. I feel like you have been talking with our director of operations over here. I know you know her, because her and I were just having this conversation earlier this week about trade groups and associations and what's the right mix and flavor in terms of interaction. And so I will take a page out of her book to give her some credit. So if you're going to go to any of these type of networking groups or associations or events, the thing you got to realize is two things. Going to one event is not going to do anything. It's a consistency piece. So if you're going to bother to go to one, try going to the next one, the third one, because that will really give you a better idea as to, are these the right professionals for you to mix with? Does it have the right feel, right? The environment, and all that kind of nice stuff. What we saw while I was involved with Device Alliance, more from a kind of running it and strategy, was you would have people show up, and while they may be nice people, but they're showing up for the wrong reasons. So they would come to the event trying to get something. They would trying to land a new account, try to make a sale. Unfortunately, they just got laid off, and so they're trying to get a new job.
Right.
Where the missed opportunity there is that they're not giving anything back. So it's kind of like this idea of, I'm going to keep going to the ATM and pulling out cash.
Yeah.
But at some point, if I don't make a deposit, there's no cash there left, right? And I've kind of just burned a hole in my pocket.
Right.
And it's, as silly as an analogy like that is, that's very true in the networking world, which is, people can smell that kind of approach really quick in talking with someone. And if they feel like you're there for the wrong reasons, or just to make a quick buck, or to just help yourself, it has a way of turning people off at times. So the advice that I have given folks, especially folks who are maybe younger in their career, is try to figure out a way to learn, help someone else learn, or give something back. And then once you've done that, you certainly have a better right to ask for something in return. But if we just go to events and, just like, hey, can you help me get a job? Or I love this one. Oh, hey, I saw you work at X, the biggest medical device company in the area. Can you get me a job there?
Right.
It's like, well, hey, I'm sorry to hear that you lost your job. I don't know you. Why would I, and so these are the things that kind of transpire at networking events.
This is great advice. I love it.
The cost thing, because you had brought that up a moment ago. I don't really know if I have a great answer on that. I can tell you what I would personally spend. to be a part of a networking group, depending on who that organization is, maybe up to several $100s to a couple $1,000s if it's a very unique group that has a very specific approach. One of the things I will say that is a little bit of a turnoff for me is when I come across some sort of a trade group or networking association and they have a buy-in, but then there is an additional cost on top of that every time you attend an event.
Okay.
So, everybody has their approach and everybody has their strategy for how they price their groups. I just personally have found that that's a big turnoff.
Okay.
That's my own kind
Don't
of
name organizations.
flavor on the
Fair
game.
enough. Fair enough. That's great. So what about tips on, well, have you encountered any expensive pitfalls or fails consuming legal services or failing to use legal services? Or do you have any anecdotal stories along those lines?
That's a great question. So I'm just trying to figure out what's appropriate to share.
I know.
So yes, the short answer is the first thing that's coming up, it's more business related, is I had hired an attorney multiple years ago to help us with a particular issue that we were dealing with. And I just didn't know what I didn't know in that moment. And so the first attorney that I hired was also the first person I talked to. So that was mistake number one. We'll call it a rookie mistake. But what I later found out was that person was a generalist. But what I needed in that particular instance was someone who was very skilled and experienced with employment law. So I think my learning opportunity in that moment is it's not one size fits all. You have to look at the service you are requesting based on the situation. And my recommendation is, and yes, it does take time, but try to interview multiple sources to get an understanding for what their core competency is, and just as important, who their typical customer is. And that's probably where I made the mistake. The attorney that we hired was used to working with organizations that were hundreds of millions of dollars annual. They have different problems rather than working with a small organization that has an employee headcount under 50, right? So what I ended up experiencing in that moment was getting advice from that attorney that perhaps was still accurate. It just wasn't appropriate for a small business.
Okay, so I'm hearing from you, go out there and interview, ask questions, ask to be educated on things that you wouldn't know because you don't know the space. Try and get some extra information out rather than volunteer a solution and ask if they can solve your problem with that solution. And look for some way to align interests or make sure that there's an understanding that the service provider or lawyer understands the size of your business, the magnitude of the risk and the likelihood of something bad happening, so that they don't offer a really great solution to a really big problem, but that's, putting the cart before the horse.
Exactly. And, one of the best ways to do that, if I found myself in that situation again, where I needed support of some kind, whether it was an attorney or something else, and I hadn't done that before, the first two things I'm doing is, one, I'm going on Google and I'm just going to simply do research based on my problem and the typical person that solves that problem, right? So at least that's a starting point to learn kind of what their backgrounds would be, what their area of focus would be. The second thing, though, is I'm going to go try to talk with some of my peers, meaning other business owners, other people that operate business units as a GM or something like that, to learn how they've dealt with it and who they've worked with. I would always rather get a referral than start from scratch going on Google, crossing my fingers, trying to hope I find someone. So that's kind of the new process I take, rather than rushing to Google and going on Yelp or something like that to try to find help.
I love it. I love it. Do you ever rush into projects and think that the sooner I start painting, the faster I'll get this done? And how old were you when you discovered that the preparation, the tape, the plastic, and preparing to throw everything away was way more valuable and a better approach to getting a project done faster and more efficiently? How old were you? Because I feel like I just learned this lesson.
Man, it's so funny how you just described that, Eric. Is I love painting.
Okay.
I do it as a hobby, not painting walls in your house, but art stuff.
Okay.
So as a result of that, I have done a fair amount of house painting, meaning walls inside, interior.
Okay.
You just nailed that. The prep time it takes to start that project is often longer than the project itself.
Way longer.
What a pain in the rear that is.
Yeah, I hate it.
Yeah. So, when did I first learn that? I mean, I have no idea. But what I can tell you is when I started this business, I was in my early 30s. And I had a father that owned a business at that time. I knew another person that owned a business. So I had done a good bit of discussion with people I trusted. What I thought I knew going into starting that business in terms of, what was it going to take, hours, investment financially, it was, I don't know, a third of what it actually took.
Okay.
I mean, I thought I'd be able to get the business up and running, see sales coming in, revenue being driven within a matter of like 6 months. I mean, it was well beyond that. And I went into it somewhat prepared. So, yeah, I mean, I guess based on that story, my early 30s, but I would tell you that I still make that mistake at times. I tend to be emotionally charged in that if I have a good idea, I'll do research, but I also love just the fire, of running into it and just like, let's get it going, right?
Yeah.
Trying not to do the shiny object syndrome bit, but sometimes that's a good thing, right? But other times, if you're not careful, that can really kind of, for lack of a better word, paint you into a corner, right?
Nice. Nicely done. I like that. So a little bit different, which is, have you seen the problems with starting a company and there being a lack of documentation? Earlier you talked about alignment of the founders and the motivations weren't there, or they were misaligned. Have you seen, heard, or have any tips or stories about founders messing up? Can legal agreements, founders agreements, is there anything that can help? Is there anything that's bulletproof?
Look, I mean, that you're probably better to answer that than me, but what I will tell you is I'm shocked how often people do things on a handshake, on a verbal agreement. It's like, this is not 1890 anymore. We have the ability to document things on a cell phone at least, and then get agreement via just a response to an email. I mean, that at a minimum. But as you certainly well know better than myself, at a minimum, an operating agreement should be put in place between two or more individuals, which outlines, here's what you're doing, here's what I'm doing, here's the investment we're making. Oh, and by the way, if this thing goes south, how is that process going to work? I will never forget that as long as I live. Like, it was such a valuable learning lesson for me as a business owner and just professional in general. you should always think with the end in mind. The problem is nobody ever thinks that this thing's going to dissolve and crash into this fiery inferno, right?
Right.
But from a legal perspective, you sometimes need to treat it that way. And that's the great thing about, if you get a really good operating agreement, it will have language in there which talks about, in the unfortunate situation, we can no longer see eye to eye. We just can't keep this business going, whatever the heck it is. Yeah. This is the process we're going to take to dissolve the business. And then that way, unfortunately, should that occur, it's not an emotional decision at that point in time where people are potentially backed up into a corner in a wall. You have that operating agreement to kind of follow that process.
Yeah. Thank you for reiterating that for our listeners, because I run into it all the time.
I'm sure.
I think I sell services by explaining to people what you said, which is we have the end in mind, which is we kind of think of all the bad things that can happen, and 80 to 82% of the time do happen. So
in a funny way, I kind of look at that as, I know this is kind of getting into a little darker side of the conversation, but it's kind of like a prenup, right? In a way, people who are choosing to go into business with each other, it's kind of like you're professionally getting married. There are often real consequences as a result of this business relationship, i.e. marriage, not working out, right? Yeah. So you really should have terms in this operating agreement. For example, because I had to learn this the hard way, arbitration, right? Whether you're doing it through AAA or you're doing it through JAMS, having content in there that talks about the fact that you are going to go to arbitration. I mean, gosh, that alone right there, if for the listeners, if you're not familiar with what arbitration is, please go read about it, because that absolutely needs to be there as a result if you're looking to start up a business with others.
Great advice. Great advice. So away from the darker side of things, I hear you talking about, and I think I've seen a couple of your motorcycles. Tell me about. Do you got a hog? What kind of bike do you have? What's your favorite thing about it?
It's more of a scooter, Eric, but I'm just kidding.
I doubt that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because actually tomorrow I am heading out on a ride through the desert with my father. We do this annual ride every year. And so, I've been riding quite a long time. It's a big passion of mine. Just to be able to get out, kind of empty your head and thoughts right on the open road is, not to be cheesy about it, but it's an absolutely cathartic experience. It just, I really look forward to these moments. So I ride a Harley, right? Because I wouldn't ride anything else.
Thank you.
America.
Thank you. America.
Other than, I will say, Indian makes an incredibly nice bike. I would probably consider that if they had, it's kind of hard to get parts.
Okay.
That is the advantage with Harleys. And Harley, the Harley of the 90s, and all the problems that came with them, like crankcase leaks and stuff like that, it doesn't exist anymore. Harley makes an amazing bike. And it's an amazing story. That company was founded in 1903, right? It's kept up with the times, and I'm just a big supporter of that organization, and they make a great product. So I'm happy to use
awesome. It. Where are you going through the desert, or what deserts? And do you do camping? Do you get a tent, or do you hit the Motel 6? What's the plans?
We do all that. This trip in particular, though, we're heading out to Joshua Tree and kind of going up around that national park, and then we're going to be. So this is a bucket list item, Eric.
Awesome.
I'm scratching off a bucket list item. And the funny thing is, it's about an hour and a half from our house. So I just can't believe I've not done this before. But in and around that general area of Joshua Tree is a really famous saloon called Pappy and Harriet's.
Okay.
So I have always wanted to go to this place. It's also a concert hall to a degree. I think that's probably giving it more credit than
euphemism.
Yeah. But this place is just so unique and different.
Okay.
And you just don't see stuff like this often. So we'll be doing dinner tomorrow night there and seeing a show and, riding off in the dusk.
Oh, that is awesome. That's awesome. Do you belong to a club? Do you mix motorcycle riding and business, or is that just, you said cathartic? Is it a pure escape? Do you lose a ton of money? I mean, invest in your bike?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like a car. To use the word investment in anything like that, I can't say that those two go hand in hand, but I've got a good steel horse. We'll put it that way.
Nice. So I'm at the stage where I've got two boys. They're 17, and I went to the Temecula Rod and Run show at the beginning of this month, and I had a blast. I saw over 500 classic cars. Just amazing. And it was the second year in a row that I went. And I've kind of been bit by the bug. And I'm thinking about getting a 68 or a 69 El Camino. Ooh. And start wrenching a little bit with my best friend who's got a 69 Camaro and a 68 El Camino as his newest project car. Do you have any advice for me?
Well, I happen to have a 1965 Oldsmobile Cutlass. So I absolutely love the car. It's a boat, things like 18 and a half feet long.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. Don't get in over your head. If you get to a point where you just think you can't do it, you're always better off having someone else do it, because otherwise it's going to sit in your garage and just collect dust for years on end. So I love my car, but the challenge with a 65 Cutlass is it was a low volume year. So in 67 is really when the Cutlass started to kind of churn up from a volume perspective and from kind of public notoriety. So 67 and on, you can get parts all day long. But with a 65, it's pretty tough. It's still the A body. So I didn't know that at the time when I bought the car about 8 years ago. That means that when I'm in a situation where I need parts, it takes me 2 or 3 times as long as if I had the cars you just mentioned, 68 through kind of 70, 71, right?
Yeah, for sure. Is she running? Does she got a good paint job? Do you take her out? Heck
yes, she's running.
All right.
Absolutely. I absolutely love what we've been able to do with her. The body needs a little bit of work. Like all old things, we've uncovered a little bit of rust here and there, and so we're dealing with that right now. But mechanically and electrically, it's basically like a brand new car.
Awesome. Perfect. Great advice. I appreciate it. So I want to thank you for your time, Travis, and let everybody know that Square One Engineering is right here in Orange County. They work with a ton of medical device companies, probably in vitro diagnostics. If there's anything that I don't know, here's an opportunity for you to let people know what you do and how to get a hold of you.
I appreciate that, Eric. Square One Engineering, our company, we're a boutique consulting firm doing engineering, quality compliance, regulatory related projects of all sizes, whether it's a 3-day pre-audit to a 2-year remediation project, and then obviously everything in between. But our big news that just came out last week, we had a press release, is we just opened our first satellite office out in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I'm really excited about that because that's our first expansion as an organization outside the Orange County area.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So stay tuned.
All right. Thanks so much. And I look forward to maybe having a follow-up on this in a little while. Thanks so much for your time, Travis.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll cover topics ranging from business formation and fundraising to contracts and compliance. Subscribe now and never miss an episode of Business Problem Solvers. Business Problem Solvers Podcast is proudly brought to you by Eric B. Alspaugh, APC, providing comprehensive legal solutions for startups and entrepreneurs. Visit our website at www.alspaughlaw.com to learn more. Disclaimer: the information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Consult with a qualified attorney or legal advisor to address your specific legal needs.